Hello everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of building a podcast app in Django. I think in today's episode I want to try and harden the parser, so make it a bit more resilient and make it so I'm able to import more podcasts, because if I can't import the podcast that I listen to, it's not a very good podcast app. So what I've done is I've gone to one of the other podcast apps that I currently use, and I've exported what's called a OPML file, just like a standard for sharing RSS feeds. So if I open this in my browser, here's a bunch of podcasts that I'm subscribed to over there, and I'm just going to try and import this into my application. So we're going to write a little utility, maybe have a link here where you can drop one of these files, and it should create a subscription for you for each of those podcasts. But I guess the first challenge that I want to work out is actually importing and parsing these podcasts to begin with, and we can just double check that they all work, and then maybe in another episode we can add the endpoint to actually import them. So yeah, first challenge is just making sure we can handle all the feeds, and then the next step will be creating subscriptions for them. So let's just head over to my terminal. I think it'd be nice to pop a shell and just experiment with some stuff. So I think what we can do is we can say, let's open a path to this file. So let's say downloads podcasts, and maybe we can say this is going to be read bytes. In fact, first let's say import XML to dict, and we can say OPML data is going to be XML to dict parse. We can say p read bytes. So now we've parsed the contents of this file. What was in here is now kind of in a Python representation as a dict. So you can see the top level key here is the OPML. So we can drill down into that data like this by indexing that. We can see that the OPML has the version, the head and the body, which is, version, there's a attribute here in the head, and then body. We're interested in the body, so we can drill down into that data like this. So the next thing here should be the outline, so you can get the first top level outline like this. And then this in turn will have a bunch of other outlines. So the text here will be the name feeds, because I think you can group things by like category. If you had a bunch of like programming feeds, you could make a category called programming, but I guess we're not really concerned with that. We're just assuming for now naively that you're going to have one top level thing here. So if I say outline, this should give me a list of all the feeds here. So then I think each of these, if I look at the first, has a XML URL, so I can probably say like outline and then .xml URL for outline in this. So then I can probably say like feed URLs to get all of the URLs in this list. So I've just passed the OPML file, and then I guess I need to loop over these and then just try and import them. So how are we going to do that? I think at this point I probably actually want to break this out into a script. So I wonder if there is a way to like Python, can we dump this session to a file? If we can, this will be very, very cool. We can call save my session. I want to save it as a Python file. Oh, it does do it as a IPY, so let's just try and do save. Let's just call this port feeds. It's not found in history. I didn't want you. Oh, nice. Import feeds.ipy. But where is that file? Oh, nice. So if I cat this now. Huh. That's very cool. So let me just see if I refresh this here. So I can then start editing this. In fact, I'll move this to I'll change this to just import feeds.py, and then we can say refresh again, and then import feeds, and then I can probably just start deleting some of this stuff. Yeah, that's basically what we need, right? So it's just nice to explore stuff in the terminal and then break out into a more complete example. Feed URLs. We're going to say from podcasts. Ooh, podcast models, import podcast. We want to first check if a podcast exists. So we can say podcast is going to be podcast objects.get. The feed link is going to be this, except podcast does not exist. In which case, yeah, we want to fetch that data from somewhere, so we can import our friend urllib3, and we can say something like the response here is going to be urllib3 request. We're going to make a get request where the URL is going to equal the URL, and then we can say maybe the podcast is the parser ingest podcast. Is that what it was? Let's double check what we do in, is it in admin? Yes, so ingest podcast with the response.data, which means we also need to include here parser and ingest podcast like this. Cannot pass from urllib3, yeah, that's correct. And we should be good, and let's just print every URL. So we're going to skip podcasts that already exist, so we're only going to process podcasts that don't exist. We're going to make a request to that podcast and then try and ingest it. We're not going to worry about subscriptions for the time being. We're just going to loop over all of the data in this OPML file and just try and parse it basically into our database. So let's break it out here and restart this, and maybe I can do a run. Import feeds. Okay, so it likes some of these. Oh, and we had an error. So it looks like a podcast episode here is blowing up for a specific podcast, and that is this one, this megaphone.fm. So we click on U and we look at the items here. It doesn't look like there is like an episode URL, so potentially in our parser, this looks suspicious. We have this enclosure thing that we probably need to handle. So how can we do this? Maybe we can create like a new script that's just like a quick test where we can just import that file and just keep on calling that programmatically, or maybe we download this as like as a test case. I'm inclined to actually maybe write a test, because we already have some feed data in here. So what is this one? This is the Are You Garbage podcast. Awesome. Can I copy paste everything in here? It won't let me Control A, so let me try and just wget U, and what is it saved as? This. And let's move you to podcasts, test data. Let's call this Are You, is it just the Are You Garbage? Let's just call it .rss. Okay, so if we go back here and refresh, we should have new test data in here, and then potentially in our tests we can call this test parser here. So now our tests should actually be failing as well, instead of actually hitting the instead of having to test this manually by refetching the podcast, we can probably just do manage.py tests. Oh, And yeah, so we've reproduced that issue there in our test case because we're missing this this site link. So I think what we can do here, just make this a bit bigger, maybe we can only test the specific example. So let's just add a breakpoint here. Let's see what happens. So the path here is going to be stuff you should know. So can I say path.stem? Path.stem. So let's say if path.stem is not equal to ru garbage, then we're just going to temporarily skip that. And now we should only get to this thing if the path is ru garbage, and else it should quit. So it means any breakpoints that we set inside the parser should be hit in the right place. So inside parse item here, I imagine is where it's going wrong. If we test this, and look at this data, let's have a look at what keys are available. It looks like we are trying to get the link, so we're calling data.get link, which obviously doesn't have anything in it. If we look at the items themselves, the item we actually need is like this enclosure thing. So do we have the enclosure? We do, so we can type enclosure, and then maybe we want a default of this.get URL. So I guess if this data.link is none, we want to do data.getLink, else fall back to this other one, so we can replace, I think, our parsing code with this here. So get rid of you. Come on, copy and paste, and we can get rid of our breakpoint, and then we can cross our fingers and kind of pray. Okay, that seemed to have worked. We're getting a bunch of time zone errors. Received a naive date time while time zone support is active. Okay, let's not worry about that for the time being. That's maybe a problem for future Jack. And let me just uncomment my test here, get rid of you, and we should make sure we're actually running our full tests. Okay, so all of the test suite is now running. And now I guess we can try and import our podcast again by calling run import feeds. So, so now we've got another error, and this time it looks like a podcast is missing a feed link, and it looks like the podcast in question is this one, the audio long read podcast. So again, it's just like the data is coming in a slightly different way. We have this iTunes new feed URL, which I guess we'll need to fix. So again, following the same strategy, I think let's just take this test case, let's just wget this file, what did it save it as, and move this podcast.xml to podcasts, test data, and what's this? This is called the audio longread.xml. And all of this should be kind of really helpful with downloading all of these test cases, so that if we change anything to the parser, then it should be quite resilient. So let's say the audio long read, and then do manage.py test, and this test should fail the same way. Why didn't you fail? Are we even getting to this code? Test data audio. Oh, because it's I saved it as XML, and this should be RSS. and just double check that this is happening again. Test. Okay, cool, we have the failure that we wanted, and let's just reaffirm what is failing. In fact, we can actually look it up here. We can say audio long read. It's because this has no, although it does appear to have a link, but it doesn't have a feed link. So let's just double check in the parser what's going on here. So when we pass the podcast, we distinguish between the feed link and the site link. So the site link is just channel.getLink, so that's that. And the feed link is we call pass feed link on the channel.get atom link. Okay. But I'm guessing we don't have this channel.get atom link, so set a breakpoint and let's poke around and see what we do have. So here we're going to have a channel, and this is going to have keys, and the channel has the link, and that link is going to be what we use for the site link, but we do actually want the feed link. So, excuse me, getting a bit lost. Looking back inside here, the thing that we want, the XML feed, it doesn't look like there's any other XML thing in here, is actually in this iTunes thing. So, what can we say here? In our parser, we are looking for an atom link. So we're saying channel.get atom link, and we're finding that that is empty. But what we actually want is, if that is empty, we probably want this iTunes new feed URL, and that just gives us a string. Okay. So how can we do this? We could still pass, we could return by default if this is missing. We could say or channel.get iTunes new feed URL, else return a dictionary, and then we could say elif is instance data string, then just return data. And it's a bit messy and it's a bit naive, but I think it would work. So let me just quit out and try this again and hit return, and yeah, that does appear to have worked. So let's delete our breakpoint again in the test. Let's just let's comment this out, and let's make sure all of our tests run. Okay, cool. And then again, let's just try and import our feeds. Maybe I need to reload this for it to take effect. Let's just double check. It does seem to still be complaining about this one, the long read. Yeah, let me reload this because the parser has changed, so I guess I will need to run this again. Okay, so yeah, it got past there. Okay, we're making progress. This is good, this is really good. Keep going. Come on. And I guess this again highlights probably another issue with this kind of naive approach that we're taking, is all of this is completely synchronous. Like, we're doing URLs one by one, and potentially we could be doing this asynchronous because it's like non-blocking. We could make all of these requests and then await the responses. We could potentially be doing that kind of in parallel, and our web app could still be serving requests instead of being blocked, synchronously waiting for each of these responses. So yeah, another thing to kind of consider in the future. Looks like we have another problem with site links here. So scroll up. It looks like this podcast in question is a problem. What did we say? Site link. And remember, site link is just naively getting the link to the site. So let's just check out this one. This podcast. It's another comedy podcast. It looks like the site link itself perhaps really doesn't exist. Like, these are all RSS feeds This is a self link, but that's RSS, that's RSS, that's RSS. We got a newsfeed URL. No. So it genuinely doesn't look like this has a site link. So this one might actually require a migration, dare I say, because all of these point to feeds. And again, we're seeing this iTunes new feed URL in addition to this Atom link that we kind of prefer, but they both appear to be pointing to the same content. Yeah, this looks to be the same. So what we do, I think, is head to the models and head to the site link here. Is it definitely the site link it's complaining about? Yeah, and we just need to say blank true, null true, I guess. And then here, make migrations, podcasts, and then migrate. And then we can try again, I guess. Say manage.py shell. And again, we can try and import that feed. Unique constraint failed. Podcast feed link. Unique constraint failed. Okay. Which podcast is it complaining about here? This is, let's try and open in Cape. Wow, this one's a bit of a mess. Whoa, this is a lot of information. Does this have any episodes at all? This doesn't look like a podcast feed. Do we have items? We do have items, but it's just really weirdly formatted. It's really interesting. It says the podcast feed link unique constraint has failed. But the feed link would be this thing that we're currently on. So let me copy you and say, so in our models here, the feed link should be unique per podcast. So, but we should have checked that the podcast exists already. Feed link equals this, and it says a podcast matching this query does not exist. So how is a unique constraint here failed? Maybe we have a podcast where the feed link is blank for some reason. No, that can't be it. Maybe if we just look in the admin, it will become apparent what's going on here. Let's have a look here and go to podcasts. Yeah, this is really odd. Maybe it just already imported and we accidentally did it twice. Do we have a title here? Ukraine. Very weird. What would it be? It's not you, it's not you. Is it this one? There's a BBC one. Let me just try deleting this Putin one. In fact, let's go nuclear, let's delete everything. Is it going to like this? Because I'm going to also have to delete some subscriptions and lots of episodes. Yeah, let's go for it. Come on. And then let's quit out. Definitely did apply that migration. And then let's just try importing everything from scratch. Okay. There's those naive datetime problems cropping up. Okay, we're chewing through these podcasts, albeit slowly, but I think soon we may hit the same issue again, or we may not. It might just be a case of data in the database was a bit shonky. In fact, we can rerun this script and see what happens second time. So this podcast again is missing a feed link. If we scroll up, we should have a URL somewhere after all this warning about date time stuff. So this is Darknet Diaries, great podcast. We have a look at this. Okay, so here in this specific instance, the feed link is the atom link. So how can we deal with this? So again, I think what we'll do is we'll take you and we'll wget this file, and we'll move Darknet Diaries to podcasts, test data, and let's just say let's call this Darknet Diaries.rss, and then let's go to our tests. We can uncomment this. It's turned out to be quite useful, and we can say Darknet Diaries, and if we do manage.py test, I would hope this failed. Let me refresh this. Test data, Darknet Diaries. Let me just copy you and make sure I've definitely spelled Darknet Diaries correctly. Okay, that's interesting. That seems to be fine when I import the podcast this way, but not in my actual script. Was it definitely Darknet Diaries that failed? Double check. Apparently it is Darknet Diaries that was failing. But in here it seems to be just fine. Let me just double check that it's getting here, because that's usually something that fails. Path.stem. Definitely we can do data is path.readBytes. Bytes. Ingest data. Oh, sorry, ingest podcast data. Huh. That's weird. Path.stem.
A few moments later.
Okay, so looking at this breakpoint, this absolutely shouldn't be here. This breakpoint should actually be down here, just so I can double check the podcast. If I say manage.py test again, we can see that the podcast here is definitely Darknet Diaries, and the podcast does have a feed link and a site link. So I don't believe this podcast is actually the problem. It just happened to be printed in our terminal earlier. So yeah, those are passing fine. So if I go back into the shell though, and again I do run import feeds, you can see that this URL is popping up a lot. I go to my parser here and just add a breakpoint. I think I know the reason why. It's because when we have this parsed podcast, we passed the feed link here to be this thing, even though what data do we get back? Yeah, this is just like the raw data. So yeah, we pass this as the feed link, even though our we have feed URL No. Yeah, even though our original URL is something different. Let me try this again. So I did run import things. Yeah, this is our original URL that we're fetching. And the thing that we pass ends up being something completely different to what we fetched. Like this is probably like redirected. And if we look here, we do podcast.objects.get. Doesn't like that. Oh, sorry. Yeah, where feedlink equals this podcast actually does already exist, which is yeah, it's a bit odd. So I wonder what would happen maybe if how can we say this? What would happen if, so I get rid of this breakpoint here and just call this will blow up, but I actually want to get this here, and I want to say URL lib.get this, and then say this rest.url. Does it get redirected though? Is that what's happening here? So URL is this. No, that doesn't seem to be it. I don't understand how this podcast can end up, we passed the feed link, how the feed link can already exist. It's like two podcasts have the exact same feed link. Let's add this breakpoint back in here. Let's see if we can discover more about this, what's going on. So this podcast in question, what is it? So do we have podcast or past? Podcast. Do we have a title? This is called Putin as well. And it has a feed link. So maybe we just do a try except here. Like we've gone all this way except podcast. What exception are we getting? We're getting a unique integrity. We're getting integrity error. That's not how you catch integrity errors, is it? Django integrity error. How do I import you? Come on. Maybe that is helpful. Yeah. So try accept integrity error. Do I want this here? No, probably not in here, because I want this method to raise an integrity error, but in import feeds, maybe we can just say try accept integrity error. Integrity error, say as X, we're going to say print, and then just continue. Let's just try this and see what happens here. So we're just going to straight up ignore the integrity errors and then figure out why two podcasts possibly end up having the same feed URL. Yes, if the foreign key constraint failed. And now we're getting other errors. Okay, foreign key constraint failed, foreign key constraint failed. And it all seems to be to do with these BBC iPlayer podcasts, which is interesting. Yeah, but let's have a look at this one then. So Daring Fireball, very popular podcast. Pass item, the GUID has no attribute get. Okay, so following along with what we've done earlier, we're just going to get this podcast here. This is in pass items. So each of these items, this GUID looks like it's just straight up text. So this looks like it should be an easy one if we just move this. What do we call it? It's just is it called RSS? Yeah, so move this RSS to podcasts, test data. Let's call this one Daring Fireball .rss. you know the drill by now. We go to tests. If it's not daring fireball, I don't want to know about it. And if we go back here, we can concentrate on that particular failing test. So we can say path is definitely daring fireball, and we're definitely reproducing that test case, which is really nice. So let's go back into our parser and have a look in parse item here, and just have a look at the shape of the data that we're dealing with. Look at data. Let's just do data get GUID. What are we trying to do? We're trying to do something special with the GUID, so maybe we need a special parse GUID function that checks I guess the type here, so we can say parse GUID here. So we can say if is instance, so if it's a string, then just return it. If it's a dict, and then return what we had earlier. So it was like GUID.get text, like that. Let me just double check. We could probably do like a git diff. Oh, it's hash text. So yeah, we have that parse GUID. Else if it's none, we're just going to get none returned from this function here. Okay, so let's give this a whirl. Don't need that breakpoint anymore. Hopefully this test should pass. Cool. What's it complaining about this? Episode of primary key is invalid foreign key, contains a value that does not have a corresponding podcast ID. Weird, is that just a way we were saving the podcasts? Probably just the way we're doing things in a test. So now again, I think we can comment out all of that, and all of our tests hopefully should pass. No. It's weird. Just double check what the hell's going on. Not null constraint failed. Podcast GUID. That's weird. So we've just introduced a break, which is why it's really good to have tests here, I guess. Oh, this is totally why, because I'm stupid. Thank you, tests. And now we should have lots of passes, but also lots and lots of warnings. My goodness. Oh no, it says failed. This is interesting. The row has an invalid foreign key. What? Has an invalid foreign key, contains a value that does not have a corresponding value. What are you talking about? Let me have a look in the parser then. That definitely happened when we were doing the Daring Fireball podcast. So let's just uncomment you again and see what's going on. This is failing. It's turning out to be quite difficult, this. So here we have a podcast. Did I delete the line that was saving the podcast? I think I did. Where were we? Inside ingest podcast. Yeah, that's why that's happening, because I deleted a line, or I shouldn't have deleted a line. Okay, that was the problem. So now we can comment you out, and hopefully all the tests should pass. Dun dun dun. Yes, other than the warnings that we're getting. So we're going to soldier on. We've got a bunch more test cases. We're going to try and import even more feeds. Dun 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 dun. Okay. Okay. Keep going. Okay. If we are getting integrity errors, then it's not particularly visible. Oh, we are here. So not null constraint fail, podcast feed link. Podcast feed link. Why would those be empty? I think I do want those to crash actually, so how are we going to do this? We can say import feeds. I do want this integrity error to blow things up. Let's try running this again. But I think we're going to run into this this BBC file, so it's probably best to like actually fix this problem, because I do think it is a legitimate issue. So here we go, here's the URL that we're trying to fetch from the internet, but according to our database, that podcast doesn't exist. Which is bizarre. Otherwise you'd never get this far, but when we ingest the podcast, we end up getting a different value for that URL here when we parse it. And that does end up existing. And if it does exist, we don't want to save it. Oh boy, this is tricky. But why does this saving here is fine? So maybe we do need special logic here to check if the podcast does already exist once you've got the feed link back, because the URL that you fetch is no guarantee of the feed link that you get back. So maybe again we just need like a try except podcast does not exist. So if the podcast does exist, we're going to say the podcast is equal to podcast objects.get feed link past podcast feed link, like that. And if the podcast doesn't exist, then we're going to do all this extra stuff, and eventually we're going to return the podcast, kind of like that, and make sure that we've actually spelled things correctly. But I'm still really unsure why it's appearing twice, and maybe that's a problem for future Jack to solve. But let's just try and keep going with some forward momentum here. Okay, so now we're actually getting more what I think are legitimate parser errors, this time for Beam Radio, I guess. Is that right? Yeah, so Beam Radio, it can't find the feed link, so let's have a look why. Have a look for some kind of RSS thing in here. And it does look like this is actually the feed link here. So we go here, what's this going to give us? Continue to site. Yes, I guess. Page isn't redirecting properly. It's weird. I think we can ignore this. Feed link seems to be kind of bogus, so I guess if the feed link is empty, we just want to make the feed link this itself is the feed link. So it's almost as if like when we pass this data, we want to kind of keep this. So I say the this is going to be equal to this. Can I keep the original URL? Is there a way of saying like I want the full URL? Full URL? Ah, okay. No, apparently we don't have that. This is in the request. Response. Object. We have URL headers, get URL. Okay. Maybe it's not possible to do this, but maybe inside ingest podcast, we want to keep the URL. This is really tricky. So it's almost as if when we import these feeds, we want to pass in like the URL here and use that as like a fallback. But we don't necessarily, we're not necessarily always passing in this extra data, but let's just make it like an optional. And if it's there, we can use it. So inside the parser, we can say URL is none, and maybe we can say, so once we've passed the podcast, say if past podcast get feed link, and then the past podcast feed link is going to be the URL if and URL is not none. So in this specific scenario, we passing the URL in, we can fall back to using that original URL potentially. Let's give this a try. But yeah, God knows what would happen if you just imported this from a file, because this straight up is not a valid URL, I guess. And again, it's missing a description, so I think that's possibly something we might need to handle. Let's have a look at items. It doesn't look like items do have descriptions. Where would an item not have a description? Or if we actually, this is a separate podcast. Yes, this is a completely separate podcast. This is Cognicast. Let's have a look at you, and items here indeed do not have a description of any kind, but they do have this key called content. It's probably because it's like a different RSS standard. So what we will do, same as always, is just wget this feed and move Cognicast to test data cognicast.rss, and then in test data can uncomment u cognicast, and let's just double check that this is failing. Yep, it's failing because there's no description. So in the parser, in parse item, get there, gonna add a breakpoint, call this again. Let's just have a look at the data, have a look at the keys. So originally we're calling data.get description, and indeed that is empty, but it does have this this content. In fact, it's this content encoded, which is what we want. Or yeah, content encoded. So looking in here, where can we find that? It's this content encoded. So content encoded, and I guess that is what we want. So in the parser here, we can say try and get the description from here, and if that doesn't exist, then just do data get content encoded. There's probably lots of people like shouting at me right now because at a top level I should probably like respect the the version of the RSS thing here, and conditionally like pass down different code paths depending on the version. But I don't even know if people actually respect that version, to be honest. Like, you could put the wrong version in, and at least here it's going to be a bit more resilient about looking for the right things. Maybe in the future we can make this a bit smarter. So let's give this a go. Test this now. Okay, so hopefully there's nothing else wrong with that feed, and presumably inside our tests this hasn't introduced any other bugs. It hasn't. Everything else is still passing. So now let's soldier on. I think let's make this the last one. See how far we get. Cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. Okay, a lot of episodes there. I think there's about 60 podcasts here, so this may take a while. Okay, this episode is missing media links, which is interesting. And that is the Waking Up podcast by Sam Harris. Let's open you in Cape. It's in my downloads here. We can see items. The media is like the thing that we actually want to download, and usually it's just like an MP3. And again, here I can see that this is present in like the enclosure tag when it should be present somewhere else. So what can I do here? This is in my downloads, so I can say move downloads RSS to podcast test data. Let's just call this one wakingup.rss, and let's make this the very last thing we do because this episode is running on a bit. So let's say waking up again. It's the one time I do want my tests to fail because it means I've reproduced the issue, and we can go into the parser and have a look inside parse episode, or parse item, sorry. Add yourself a breakpoint in there, look at the data. So typically we're looking inside enclosure for a URL. It doesn't look like we have enclosure, so let's do data.get enclosure. And we do have a URL, which is interesting. But at some point, I guess, do we not have a URL? This may take a while. So you know what? I think what we might have to do is inside here. Where are we? What is this function? It's parse podcast and update podcast. Okay, so here, what we can do is figure out, get all these channel items. So we can say channel item is all of this, and we can say item.get enclosure for item in this, and we can see a bunch of nons immediately straight off the bat. So yeah, so the last podcast definitely. So let's have a look at that item. Like we don't actually need this list comprehension. It's mindfulness meditation. Dun, 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 dun. And it has a link, but it doesn't have any media at all. So this is a 9-minute thing. Permalink false, SoundCloud tracks. Interesting. What happens if we click this? Where does this take us? This seems to be more like a blog post and no episode finds, and maybe just like this has been taken offline, so the parser probably needs to do something like after we've parsed to a podcast, is just ignore anything that doesn't have a media link, maybe. So inside ingest podcast, we need to say here we have for episode and episode. When we create an episode, we should probably say if episode dot media link, or say so if past episode get media link. We can do this, or we can say if there's no media link, we can just continue and do something defensively like that. So let's give this a try. Okay, cool. And then if we run the import script again. Dun, 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 dun. Keep going. So look how many test cases we've got now, and each of those test cases represents, I don't know, a different way that podcasts are different. So this found the bug, this found the bug, this found the bug. All of these podcasts have made our parser a bit more resilient. And because I said that that podcast was going to be the last one, I am going to stop the episode here and potentially fix the rest of these offline. So I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching.